Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Christina Patterson and deputy political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, Rachel Watson. So let's see what's on some of those front pages. The Observer leads with the growing crisis in Ukraine, reporting that secret talks are underway between Western allies to arm the Ukrainian resistance forces in the event of a Russian invasion. The Sunday Telegraph follows suit with a warning from Home Secretary Priti Patel of a possible cyber attack against British interests as Russia flexes its military might. Defiant Boris will axe all COVID rules, reads the front of the Express as it looks at revisions in coronavirus restrictions due next week. Meanwhile, the Sunday Times claims billionaires have joined Boris Johnson's secret advisory board. Its headline revealed the wealthy donors with the PM's ear. The Mirror reports that the Home Office is looking into allegedly racist WhatsApp messages sent between staff who work at a firm which does important work for its department. Car sick, reads the front of the Sunday People as it looks into reactions to another of controversial comedian Jimmy Carr's recent jokes. And there's a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by journalist and author Christina Patterson and deputy political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, Rachel Watson. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being with us this evening. Let's start with The Observer, the first front page there that we looked at. West plans to arm resistance if Russian forces occupy Ukraine. This after Boris Johnson headed to Munich and warned of what could happen, a generation of bloodshed and misery if the West stood by. I mean, the implication here is that the US is already willing to arm a resistance in Ukraine. I wonder, Rachel Watson, if you think the UK would follow suit.
I think it's a really interesting piece here from The Observer. And as you can see, this is really intensified this weekend around what is going to happen and when could this invasion happen, as it does seem pretty likely now by the comments that we've heard made from lots of leaders who are all gathering in Munich. And this piece is discussing, as you say, it sounds pretty likely that the United States have already made up their mind that they will help the Ukraine government and they will help arm, and whether that is something that the UK government want to do. Now, I do think these discussions will be being had by Western governments and Western leaders at the moment. What do we do if Russia does invade Ukraine? What if this does lead to the outbreak of war? We've heard a lot of talk around sanctions, for example, over the last few weeks, and we heard the Ukrainian president talking today in Munich, and he said, why are you waiting for sanctions? You should be doing something now to those Western allies. And I think we will be getting to the point now, if the governments really do think that Vladimir Putin is going to send troops in and invade Ukraine, they will be having those discussions over what can we do? What can we do to help Ukraine? What would be the right action to take without going too far? How do we do that? And I think those are what we will see play out in the coming days as this does, I think, begin to escalate even more. And it seems to be gathering pace as well.
Certainly, the Ukrainian President Zelensky saying that what was happening looked a little bit like appeasement, echoing the words from the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who last week said there was a sniff of Munich in the air. I wonder to what extent you think, Christina Patterson, that the sort of hangover from the chaotic exit from Afghanistan that we saw in the summer, that how much of an effect that is having on US policy at the moment, but also on UK policy, a sort of desire not to repeat the mistakes that were made then?
I think it's really hard to know. I think it's a really terrifying moment. I mean, we just haven't been in a situation, most of us alive haven't been in a situation like this, because this is the first threat of actual war in Europe beyond a civil war since the Second World War. And it's very hard to know what anyone is up to, actually. I mean, we don't really know. We know that Putin apparently is about to invade Ukraine. That the evidence seems to be overwhelming. What we don't really know is exactly why he wants to do that. And we don't really know how far the absolute mess, the moral atrocity that was our abandonment and the US's abandonment of Afghanistan. We don't know how far that is featuring in this. And to be honest, we also don't know how far Boris Johnson's desire to cling on to his job is featuring in this, because what we do know is that he is someone who is very keen to exploit any situation and opportunity for his own political gains. And although I am sure, I'm absolutely sure that he, like any British leader one could imagine, would not want there to be a war in Ukraine and would not want democracy to be threatened in the way that Russia is clearly doing. I think what is clear is that he wants to look like Churchill, because that he's always wanted to look like Churchill, and he's written a biography about Churchill, and he sees himself as a great kind of leader. So it's very, very hard to disentangle any of this. We also know, of course, that the UK has been one of the chief launderers of Russian money for some years. And, we have been welcoming billionaire oligarchs and friends of Putin into London with open arms. They own a lot of property in London. We've given them preferential visas. So we know that there has been plenty of Russian funding towards the Tory party. So frankly, a lot of this looks like, shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted. But the situation for those in Ukraine, I can't begin to imagine what it must be like now, sitting in Kiev, knowing that any minute, any day, your city, your country is about to be invaded and people will be killed. It's absolutely horrifying.
And of course, the nature of the war that might come, if it does come, is potentially different from one we've seen before. There is talk of these false flag operations, the evacuations at the moment from the eastern parts of the separatist eastern parts of Ukraine, apparently under the guise of the fact that there could be some sort of an attack on those regions. Again, thought to be false, but at least, for optics' sake, those people being evacuated there. And now, of course, this cyber attack. So the Sunday Telegraph on its front page has Britain warned of cyber attacks as Russia flexes military might. Now, we always knew this would be potentially a hybrid war if it does come. And now it seems that Britain, even if it didn't want to involve itself by arming Ukrainian fighters, is involved potentially in a cyber capacity. Rachel Watson, here it says in the Sunday Telegraph, Mr. Johnson has pledged to make it impossible for companies of strategic importance to the Russian state to raise finance in the city if the Kremlin orders an invasion. But what happens if the UK's infrastructure is targeted as a result? Both sides have a lot up their sleeves here, don't they?
Yeah, and I think we saw that there was a tweet that went out from the Russian embassy that said, spoke about sanctions and said, this is something that we know how to deal with. It's happened to us before. So there will be that on the minds of the government. How will they look at sanctions? I know the US government, we're talking a little bit more about certain pipelines, for example, but then there's the ramifications for that. And if you do block pipelines or you don't allow, you place sanctions on them, how do they then hit the West's access to oil, to energy? And also, what are the consequences of that? Because, as you say, it's not just going to be a war, if it ends up as war, that is fought on the front line, that is fought through military action. It will be. We know that there have been concerns previously and now heightened concerns, as the Telegraph reports, about Russian hacking, for example, and that cyber security issue around this. And the Priti Patel has written for the Telegraph about this in tomorrow's paper, and she's raised real concerns about the government actually expects these attacks to happen, and that the National Cyber Security Agency has spoken to certain sectors, certain key sectors, communication, utility and food industries, around how to improve security around their cyber setup to make sure that if they are targeted, they have the best possible defence.
But of course, But of course, that would demand funding, and it's extraordinary to think that they wouldn't have thought about that before. I want to quickly mention the Sunday Times with Putin issues go order for war in Ukraine. This time, the UK saying 4 senior figures in government have confirmed that they also expect a multi-pronged Russian assault to begin any day. Our intelligence, they say, is consistent with the Americans. It seems like Putin really has made that decision. And now, really, the question here, according to the Sunday Times, simply whether the Russians will take a bite out of Ukraine or launch a full-scale invasion. I'm going to leave it there for this. There's masses we could talk about with Ukraine, but we've got to take a break. Coming up after that break, do billionaires have the listening ear of the Prime Minister? You heard Christina talking about that story in the Sunday Times. We'll have more on that. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now are the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the deputy political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail, Rachel Watson. Thank you again for being with us. Let's go straight back into our stories, this time on COVID and the relaxation to all COVID rules. So the Sunday Express splashing with this on its front page. PM says it's time we learn to live with the virus. Defiant Boris will axe all COVID rules. On that front page, though, medics warning the move is premature and a big leap in the dark. Rachel, do you think it's too soon?
Well, this is a highly controversial move that the Prime Minister is going to make, and just, this will only be in England because as health is a devolved issue. So, for instance, in Scotland, that would be Nicola Sturgeon who would make that decision. She's not at this point, I don't believe. She'll also make a speech this week setting out how she wants to move out of the pandemic, but I don't expect her to align with Boris Johnson on this. But Boris Johnson seems to really be going for this. He wants to find a way for the country to live with the virus, which is the point that we're going to have to get to at some point. But the concerns being expressed by health experts are around this ditching of the legal requirement to self-isolate if you have the virus. Up until now, you've had to legally self-isolate it's been reduced to 5 days or 7 days in Scotland. So there's been that requirement that you have to, but now it will be down to that personal responsibility. You will be asked just to make that decision to self-isolate rather than being forced to. And that's where the concern comes from. Are we moving too fast with this? And if you look inside the Express, they have a poll which shows that actually a lot of people in the country are a lot more concerned about this than Boris Johnson. They're a lot more holding back a little bit more. I think half of people say that they would continue to self-isolate. Half say that they will still avoid busy places. So I don't know if Boris Johnson, he will see this as a big positive move. We are getting through the pandemic, but whether that is too fast when we still have huge case numbers right across the country, growing, people are still getting this virus in huge numbers, and how will affect that going forward?
Certainly, and it is very interesting with your hat on as the Scottish Daily Mail to see how this is going to be received by the other devolved nations. Let's quickly talk about the Sunday Times front page article as well. Revealed the wealthy donors with the Prime Minister's ear. Christina Patterson, who are they and why are they called shadowy?
Well, I must say, in 2 years of extremely shocking stories emerging about our government, not least the Partygate scandals, which have rocked the government for the last few months, this is one of the most shocking stories to have broken. And it's about, I think, 14 very wealthy people who have been giving money to the Tory party, who've been appointed to a so-called advisory group. And the article says that these 14 people, their collective wealth amounts to £30 billion. And they have been given special access to Downing Street, to meetings chaired by Lord Lister,